If Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. 1 Corinthians 15 verse 14. NIV. Paul is saying, Christianity does not rest on vague inspiration, private feelings, or moral advice, but on a historical claim. Jesus was crucified, buried, and raised from the dead. If that did not happen, Christianity is false. But if it did, the world is not a closed system. Therefore, the resurrection is both a theological and historical question. What happened to Jesus and his followers, and what best explains the evidence? Before examining the evidence, we must address the objection of miracles. If the resurrection happened, it was a miracle, raising the question, can miracles be investigated historically? Some say no because miracles violate science. Others argue they are too improbable for historians to accept, while some believe history lacks the tools to recognize divine action. I want to challenge those assumptions respectfully by clarifying three things. First, miracles need not contradict natural laws. Second, probability should not automatically rule them out. Third, miracle claims can fall within historical investigation, even if history alone cannot prove their theological meaning. First, miracles do not contradict natural laws when defined correctly. David Hume defined a miracle as a violation of natural law, a view echoed by Richard Dawkins, who treats miracles as events violating science. If so, miracles indeed seem irrational, suggesting gravity works except when it randomly breaks, or that nature contradicts itself. But that definition assumes nature is a closed system. If so, miracles cannot happen. But if God even possibly exists, the situation changes completely. Imagine catching a falling apple. You have not violated gravity, it still operates, but an external agent intervened to change the outcome. While catching an apple is simpler than raising the dead, it illustrates the logic. An intervention is an additional cause, acting alongside nature, not a contradiction. If a miracle is God acting within the created order, it does not destroy science. Natural laws simply describe what ordinarily happens when no special divine action occurs. C.S. Lewis defined a miracle as an interference with nature by supernatural power. The real question is whether a supernatural agent can act within nature. If God is possible, ruling out miracles beforehand is unreasonable. Rejecting them in advance requires knowing either that God does not exist or that he never acts in history, a philosophical conclusion, not a scientific discovery. Second, probability should not automatically rule miracles out. Bart Ehrman argues that because miracles are highly improbable, they must always be the least likely explanation in historical investigation. At first, that sounds reasonable. Dead people normally stay dead, so why should a historian accept a miracle? But probability changes depending on the hypothesis. If the claim is that Jesus rose naturally by biological processes, that is indeed fantastically improbable. Bodies do not reverse death. But the resurrection hypothesis is that God raised Jesus, which is a very different claim. If God exists and has reason to act, a resurrection is not automatically improbable. Christians are not claiming this was normal, but exceptional and divinely caused. Some use the principle of analogy to argue that if miracles do not occur today, they did not occur in the past. But that principle is too restrictive. Many historical events are unique. We do not encounter living dinosaurs today, yet we infer their existence from evidence. History and science move forward by investigating exceptions. Rejecting unusual events because they do not fit normal experience blocks discovery. Furthermore, claiming miracles do not occur today requires knowing every modern miracle report is false, which argues in a circle. This does not mean we should believe every claim. Many are weak or mistaken. But the right response is careful evaluation, not automatic rejection. Probability should be informed by context, the evidence, the worldview, and whether divine action makes sense. Once God is allowed as a possible actor, miracles are not automatically the least probable explanation. Third, miracles do not necessarily lie outside history. Some scholars warn that historians cannot simply declare that God acted. That caution is important. Historical tools can examine sources, testimony, context, and competing explanations, but claiming direct divine causation reaches beyond history into philosophy and theology. Historical data alone cannot prove the theological meaning of the resurrection, but that does not mean historians must ignore miracle claims. Historians already use philosophical assumptions, assess causation, and weigh testimony. Disciplines overlap. History, philosophy, theology, archaeology, and textual studies work together. So while a historian may not prove God caused an event, they can still ask whether the event itself is the best explanation of the evidence. For example, did Jesus die by crucifixion? Did his followers believe they saw him alive? Did Paul convert after a perceived appearance? Those are historical questions. If a miraculous explanation fits the evidence better than natural alternatives, it should not be ruled out simply because it is miraculous. The cause may involve philosophy, but the event can still be discussed historically. This raises the question, how can we identify a miracle responsibly? Michael Licona offers a helpful two-part test. A miracle claim should involve an event extremely unlikely given natural law, occurring in a context charged with religious significance. Imagine a man born blind, suddenly receiving sight. Without religious context, this is merely an unexplained anomaly, not necessarily a miracle. But if it happens immediately after prayer in a religious setting, that context changes how we evaluate it, making a miracle interpretation more reasonable. Still, religious context alone is not enough. Historicity comes first. We must establish that the event actually happened before asking whether it is extremely unlikely and religiously significant. Apply this to the resurrection. The Christian claim is not merely that something strange happened, but that it occurred in a powerful context: Jesus' ministry, his execution, the transformation of his followers, and the rise of the early church. This does not force anyone to accept the conclusion, but it means the resurrection should not be excluded beforehand. So, here is the point. Miracles do not need to be defined as violations of science. They can be understood as special acts of God within nature. Miracles should not be dismissed by probability before we ask what hypothesis is being tested, and they do not have to sit outside historical investigation, even if their ultimate cause involves philosophy and theology. With that foundation, we can return to the historical bedrock facts concerning the fate of Jesus. Gary Habermas identifies 3 facts with broad scholarly support. First, Jesus died by crucifixion. Second, shortly after his death, the disciples had experiences leading them to believe Jesus had been resurrected and had appeared to them. Third, within a few years, Paul converted after experiencing what he interpreted as a post-resurrection appearance. The mistake many skeptics make is rejecting miracles beforehand. Once rejected in advance, one is forced to choose only naturalistic explanations, such as hallucination theories, even if they struggle to explain the data. Michael Licona contends that Jesus' resurrection is the best historical explanation of the relevant bedrock. Because it fulfills the criteria for the best explanation and outdistances competing hypotheses, the historian is warranted in regarding the resurrection as an actual past event. You do not have to begin by assuming Christianity is true, but you should not begin by assuming miracles are impossible. If we are serious about truth, we should examine the facts with an open mind, including the possibility that God has acted in history. If the resurrection hypothesis is as strong as its defenders argue, then the historical resurrection of Jesus may be more than an argument. It may be the doorway to discovering the truth of Christ and the true meaning and purpose of life.